Here is something most people are never told. Memory loss does not begin on the day you forget a name, a face, or why you walked into a room. It begins years, sometimes a full decade, before that, quietly, with no warning signs at all. While you feel completely sharp, and here's the part that actually changes things. Your brain is not a fixed organ. It is not a machine that simply wears out over time. Research from the past 20 years has settled this question for good. Your brain can build entirely new connections at any age. Not slow the decline, not hold steady, actually build. That process has a name, neuroplasticity. And it is not a theory, it is a measurable, documented biological process that happens inside your brain every time it encounters a problem it has not solved before. At the end of this video, I am going to walk you through 7 specific exercises. Do all of them cleanly on your first try, and your brain is in excellent shape. Struggle with several of them? That is not a problem. That is your brain telling you exactly what it needs. And those same 7 exercises are precisely how you give it that. But first, I want to show you what is actually happening inside your brain right now. Because when you understand why these exercises work, you do them differently. You do them consistently. And that is when they start to pay off. If you want clear, honest brain health information every week, hit subscribe before we continue. Now let's talk about what is really going on inside your head. As the years add up, thinking gets a little harder for almost everyone. That is not weakness. That is biology. But here is the important distinction. For some people, the changes stay small and manageable. Occasional forgetfulness, slower recall. For others, it becomes something more serious, a genuine decline in quality of life, increasing dependence on the people around them. And underneath both outcomes sits one specific biological process most people have never heard of. When you are under chronic stress, when sleep is consistently poor, when inflammation is quietly running inside your body, your cells begin producing an excess of something called free radicals. A free radical is simply an unstable molecule missing one electron. And because it is missing that electron, it searches for one. It damages the healthy cells around it, trying to take what it needs. Your neurons, the cells that make up your brain, are particularly exposed to this damage. The brain consumes roughly 20% of all the oxygen your body takes in, despite making up only 2% of your body weight. That enormous energy demand means enormous chemical activity. And enormous chemical activity means constant opportunity for something to go wrong. Researchers call the buildup of this damage oxidative stress. And the evidence now points to oxidative stress as one of the central drivers of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. Here is exactly where the damage happens. Inside every neuron sit tiny structures called mitochondria, the energy-producing engines of the cell. Free radicals attack those engines. When the engines begin to fail, the neuron is starved of energy, and slowly, quietly, it begins to die. This is the critical thing to understand. All of this is happening long before anyone notices a single symptom. You can feel completely normal while this breakdown has been underway for years. The brain fog, the forgetfulness, the walking into a room and forgetting why, that is not the beginning of this process. That is the middle of it. Now, here is where most people make their first move, and where it quietly goes wrong. They start taking supplements, antioxidant vitamins. Something they read might protect the brain. And for the body as a whole, that instinct is not wrong. But for the brain specifically, most people feel no difference at all. And there's a very specific reason for that. Between your bloodstream and your brain sits a filtering system called the blood-brain barrier. Its entire job is to keep toxins, bacteria, and foreign substances out of your brain. You want that barrier, it protects you every single day. But it does not make exceptions for the things you want to get through. It blocks most antioxidant compounds too. So your supplements go to work in your bloodstream, they do their job there, then they reach that checkpoint. And most of them simply do not get through to the brain tissue where you were hoping they would help. Think of someone who has been diligently taking supplements for years. They tell their doctor they have noticed no difference in their memory or focus. They are not imagining it. The antioxidants are doing their job in the bloodstream. They just cannot reach the place where the real work needs to happen. This is not about supplements being useless. It is about the brain playing by stricter rules than the rest of the body. And this is exactly why protecting your brain through physical and mental exercise is not just helpful. It is irreplaceable. Because exercise works from the inside out. It does not need to cross any barrier. It tells your brain directly to produce its own protective compounds from within the very tissue that needs protecting. When you move in a way that challenges your nervous system, your brain releases a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Scientists sometimes call it miracle grow for the brain. It promotes the growth of new neurons, the strengthening of existing connections, and the repair of damage that has already begun. And unlike a supplement, it is produced right inside the brain itself, no checkpoint required. Now here's where most people make their second mistake, and this one is even more common than the first. They assume that because they are active and engaged every day, cooking, shopping, socializing, watching the news, helping with the grandchildren, their brain is getting the exercise it needs. It is not. And the reason comes down to one simple principle. Anything your brain does out of habit, it runs on autopilot. Your brain learned those tasks years or decades ago. It wired them in. It does not need to build anything new to complete them. It is simply replaying a program it already knows perfectly. Think of someone who has driven the same route to the same grocery store every week for 20 years. They do not think about that drive. They do not notice the turns. They barely remember making it. That is not brain activity. That is brain automation. The same applies to cooking a familiar meal, watching television, having the same conversations with the same people in the same way. These things keep you occupied. They do not challenge your brain. For your brain to build new connections, to actually increase what researchers call cognitive reserve, the protective buffer that delays dementia even when changes have already quietly begun, it needs to encounter problems it has not solved before. Things that feel slightly awkward, tasks that force several different systems to coordinate at the same time. That is precisely what these 7 exercises do. And that moment when something feels genuinely difficult, when your hands refuse to cooperate, when you lose the sequence and have to start over, that is not failure. That is the exact moment new connections are forming. The struggle is not a sign you are doing it wrong. The struggle is the whole point. A few rules before we begin. Each exercise gets at least 10 repetitions. Go slowly at first, and then speed comes on its own as your brain learns. The moment an exercise starts to feel smooth and automatic, make it slightly harder. Add speed. Say the alphabet out loud while you do it. Count backwards from 20. Keep your brain slightly off balance. That is what keeps it building. Exercise number 1 is the warm-up. It looks almost too simple to matter. That is part of the point. Touch your thumb to your index finger, making a small ring. Now slide that ring slowly along your fingers. Index, middle, ring, pinky, then back the other way. Start slowly, then gradually increase your pace. Do this on one hand first, then try both hands simultaneously, moving in the same direction at the same time. What this does that most people miss, it activates both hemispheres of the brain simultaneously and begins waking up the fine motor circuits in the prefrontal cortex. The same circuits that are among the first affected by early cognitive decline. 10 to 20 repetitions. Start now. Exercise 2. One hand lies flat, palm down on your knee or a table. The other hand is a closed fist placed upright beside it. Now switch both at exactly the same time. The flat hand becomes a fist. The fist opens and lies flat. Switch, switch, switch. Go slowly at first. The clean switch matters far more than the speed. Your brain needs to coordinate 2 completely opposite movements in perfect synchrony. That is the challenge. That is where the work is happening. Once you can do it cleanly, increase speed. Then try saying the days of the week out loud while switching. That is when your brain shifts into a higher gear. At least 10 repetitions. Begin. Exercise 3. This is where it starts to get interesting. One hand holds the tip of your nose, the other hand reaches across and holds the opposite ear, then clap once and switch. Opposite hand to nose, other hand to the other ear. Clap, switch, clap, switch. It looks like a children's game, but here is what is happening inside your brain. To complete this movement correctly, your brain must hold your hands' current positions in working memory while simultaneously planning the next position. That is dual task processing, and it directly activates the prefrontal cortex, the region that handles working memory, planning, and executive function. Research from the field of cognitive neuroscience has shown that switching between tasks like this lights up the prefrontal cortex more powerfully than almost any passive mental activity. And the prefrontal cortex is one of the first regions to show measurable deterioration in early dementia. 10 repetitions. And do not worry if you get it wrong. Getting it wrong is the brain working hardest. Exercise 4 and why, and this is the one most people find the most frustrating, which means it is the most valuable. One hand pats the top of your head with a flat palm, up and down. The other hand rubs your stomach in slow, smooth circles simultaneously. Now switch. The patting hand becomes the rubbing hand. The rubbing hand becomes the patting hand. The frustration you feel when the two movements refuse to cooperate? That is not a sign you are failing. That is the exact moment your brain is building the most new connections. That friction is the mechanism. When two different motor programs compete for control at the same time, your brain is forced to create an entirely new coordinating circuit to manage both. Neurological rehabilitation specialists use exercises almost identical to this one, specifically because of that dual motor coordination demand. 10 repetitions on each combination. Exercise 5 adds a cross-body element, one of the most powerful triggers for inner hemispheric brain activation. Standing if possible or seated is fine. Lift your right knee and touch it with your left hand. Then lift your left knee and touch it with your right hand. Alternate. Right knee, left hand, left knee, right hand, building into a steady rhythm. Movements that cross the body's midline force the two hemispheres of the brain to communicate and coordinate with each other. Research has consistently shown that cross-body movements activate the corpus callosum, the bridge of neural fibers connecting the brain's two halves, more powerfully than same-side movements. Once you find the rhythm, count backwards from 50 out loud while continuing the movement. Now your brain is running 3 systems at once: motor coordination, cross-hemisphere communication, and working memory. That is exactly the cognitive load that builds new connections. 20 repetitions. Exercise 6. One hand goes to your temple, a military salute. The other hand makes a thumbs up pointing forward. Hold both positions clearly. Now switch both simultaneously. The saluting hand becomes the thumbs up. The thumbs up hand goes to the temple. Switch, switch, switch. Start slow. Both positions must be clean and distinct before you increase speed. Sloppy switching gives your brain an easy way out. Precise switching is what forces it to work. When you can do this cleanly at a verbal task, name a country for every switch or count by 3s. That is the point where this exercise stops being a hand game and starts being a genuine brain workout. 10 to 20 repetitions. Exercise 7. This is the hardest one, which is exactly why it is also the most effective. Touch your thumb to each finger in sequence: index, middle, ring, pinky, then reverse pinky, ring, middle, index. Do this on one hand first. It should feel like a small wave rolling up and down your fingers. When that feels manageable, do both hands at exactly the same time, moving in the same direction. Then, and only when you are ready, try both hands moving in opposite directions. One hand going index to pinky, while the other goes pinky to index simultaneously. Brain imaging studies have shown that this single exercise activates more distinct regions of the brain simultaneously than almost any other hand movement. The motor cortex, which controls the movement itself. The sensory cortex, which processes the touch of each finger. The cerebellum, which fine-tunes the coordination. And the prefrontal planning regions, which sequence each movement in the correct order. 4 separate brain regions activated by one exercise done at a kitchen table. Start with 10 repetitions on each hand separately, then bring both hands together. Go slowly. The goal is precision first, speed second, and here's what tends to happen for people who stick with these exercises consistently. The first week feels awkward and slightly embarrassing. The second week starts to feel slightly more manageable. By the 3rd and 4th week, the movements that felt impossible begin to flow. That is not getting used to a trick. That is your brain doing exactly what we have been discussing, building new wiring that was not there before. Let me bring everything together. Cognitive decline does not arrive without warning. It builds over years and sometimes decades, which means you have years to push back against it. Your brain builds new connections when you give it unfamiliar problems to solve, Routine keeps you busy, challenge keeps you sharp, and those two things are not the same. The 7 exercises you just did are exactly that kind of challenge. 15 minutes, a few times a week. That is the entire ask. Give it 2 months, and most people begin noticing real changes. Thinking shifts gears more quickly, focus holds longer. The exercises that tied their hands in knots begin to flow. Is this worth discussing with a neurologist or your regular doctor? Absolutely. Especially if memory changes, ongoing fatigue, or difficulty concentrating are already part of your daily experience. It might be the conversation that leads you to take a real look at your sleep, your stress levels, and whether chronic inflammation might be playing a role. And I would genuinely like to know one thing from you. In the comments below, tell me how old you are. I ask because it genuinely shapes how I approach these topics. Knowing the age of who is watching helps me make every video more useful and more specific for you. So tell me, how old are you? And which of these 7 exercises was the hardest for you? If this video gave you something useful, or like helps more people find it, and subscribing to Sharp Mind After 50 means you will not miss a single video. We publish new brain health information every week. Calm, science-based, and built for the people who need it most. Your brain is still building. Give it the right problems to solve.